There we go. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for making it to this webinar this evening on Herbal Leys, livestock nutrition and whole farm health. I am particularly excited about this, just saying as a first time cattle owner, I've only had my cows for a year, and we're going into our first calving season, so I'm quite excited to find out how to look after them properly. And hoping this webinar is going to give me lots of information. My name is Abby, and as I said earlier, my camera is not working, so you can't see that I'm wearing a ball gown. Not really. But yes, no, apologies for that. So just for context, I coordinate something called the Regenerative Farming Network in Scotland. We are now have about 360 members, farmer members, across Scotland. And there's some of you here who are members of the network. Do please introduce yourselves in the chat, by the way, if you want to. No, not compulsory, but it's very, very nice to know who's here and where you're sort of dialing in from. The Regenerative Farming Network started as a small farm cluster of farmers in Dumfries and Galloway and South Ayrshire. We got together in 2021 to start talking about agriculture and climate change in relation to COP26. It's COP26 related projects, and it's just kind of grew from there. And now, as I said, about 360 members across Scotland, and we have around 8 farm clusters dotted across Scotland that kind of come under the RegenFarm network umbrella. We are a member of the Scottish Agroecology Partnership, which is a coalition between ourselves, Pasture for Life, Nature Friendly Farming Network, Soil Association Scotland, Land Workers Alliance, Nourish Scotland, Scottish Crofting Federation, and Nourish. And we work together to raise the profile of and amplify the voices of farmers who are learning about and practicing agroecology in Scotland. And we do a lot of work at sort of lobbying policy kind of level, making sure that there's appropriate representation alongside the more conventional side of the industry, shall we say. And we have collectively got some funding through the Scottish Government's Knowledge Transfer Innovation Fund for a programme called Upscaling Agroecology. And that's where this webinar fits in. So yeah, we're running various webinars, farm walks. We've got a conference in October, which will be at where's it going to be? Balcaskey, I think, in Fife. Oh no, it's not. It's Gardswell in Perthshire. That's where it's going to be. And lots more knowledge sharing and lobbying work besides, including 2 hustings events. Obviously, we're running into the Scottish Government elections at the moment. So that's probably enough of an introduction. I'm going to hand over to our 2 speakers. The way we're going to run this is we're going to hear from Lahra first, and followed by Lynnie. So Lahra is, find my bios. Lahra splits her time as a consultant for Ruminant Revival, a veterinary-led company supporting clients with drawing inputs on farm and for a farm-only veterinary practice in Northumberland. And we'll go seamlessly into Lynnie after that. Lynnie is a farmer based in Sussex who works with Whole Health Agriculture, a not-for-profit company who helps restore farmers to restore health to land and livestock for the benefit of all. Love that. Following the 2 presentations, we will have about 20-25 minutes for Q&A discussion. Please do post questions in the chat as we go, if you like. Otherwise, you can hold them back and speak on in the Q&A at the end. So without further ado, hand over to Lahra.
Hello, let me share my screen. Here we go. Please, can someone confirm that I've done that correctly?
Looks good. Thank you.
Perfect. Lovely. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, first of all, very much to Abby for inviting me to come along and speak to you all this evening. I'm really excited to be talking to you about a couple of my very favourite subjects. And I'm also very excited to be sharing the webinar stage, so to speak, with Lynnie. I've had a chance to look at her slides already, and I'm very excited to hear what she's got to say. So tonight, I'm going to talk us through the importance of providing a diverse diet, so micronutrients requirements for ruminants. So I'll talk about cattle and sheep, but I might divert into one or the other depending on what I'm talking about. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the rumen microbiome. So talk about the importance of the microbiome, why we want to support it. I'll also talk a bit about why providing a diverse diet through the opportunity of grazing either herbal leys or tree fodder is important from a welfare point of view. No veterinary talk would be complete without listing a lot of negative implications. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of pitfalls that we've had people fall into when they make big changes in their grazing system, and just what to avoid. And then I'm going to finish with a little bit of basically self-indulgence for personal interest, which is nutrient density of beef and how that might differ based on the management practices that we're engaging with on farm. So first of all, this will probably not be news to you, so I apologise in advance if any of this is a little bit too basic, but I thought we better just cover everything to make sure that we don't miss anything out. So ruminants and sheep and cattle need a very diverse diet, and you'll be familiar with a lot of these different things, and you'll probably be providing them in different ways on farm already. So there's a variety of minerals that are needed for a ruminant to be healthy. Copper, cobalt, iodine, manganese, zinc, iron, selenium, to name a couple. Vitamins, so A, D, and E, and others. Energy, protein, obviously water. On the right-hand side, I've just got a list of potential bodily processes and the variety of macronutrients that they need. The overall point is they need a lot of everything all of the time to do any function that they've got. And the important thing is, in a conventional farming system, or a farming system where we're, I guess, not giving them an option of what they're grazing, we need to provide every one of these macro and micronutrients for the animal to be healthy. So are we providing it through fodder? Are they housed? Is it through silage, chopped straw, probably at the moment? Are they getting it through lick buckets? How are we ensuring that we're sustaining every need that they have? It becomes very challenging to actually meet the needs appropriately in a conventional farming system, in my opinion. We'll hear from Lynnie later on why introducing different plant species into the diet can hopefully help you meet these needs in an alternative way. So hopefully that gives you a brief summary of why they need all of these diverse micronutrients. So now launching into my absolute favourite subject, which is the rumen microbiome. Again, this might be knowledge that you guys already have, but just as a reminder, the rumen, so cow or sheep has 4 stomachs, and one of them is the rumen, which is a massive vat that contains a phenomenal volume of biological life. So there's bacteria, there's another type of bacteria called archaea, but it has its own separate category, fungi and protozoa. And what those microorganisms do is they take what should be a feed that's fairly indigestible in most systems, and they break it down into what we call volatile fatty acids and essential amino acids that can then be processed by the body as energy, or by the cattle or the sheep as energy. So what's quite incredible about that system is the sheer volume of microorganisms. Again, this might not be news to you, but probably my favourite fact is that in a mil of rumen fluid, there's actually the same amount of bacteria as if you filled a swimming pool with grains of sand. So the number of grains of sand in that swimming pool is the same as the number of bacteria within a mil of rumen fluid. That blows my mind. I think that's incredible. So we have there a very complex ecosystem. It is certainly comparable to the soil ecosystem, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. And these organisms exist in a delicate balance. And we often talk about feeding the cow or feeding the sheep, but we also maybe need to think about how we're feeding their microbiome. Thankfully, human gut health is becoming a much bigger conversation at the moment, and certainly globally. And it's a similar story in cattle. You know, your gut health underpins your wider overall health. And I'll go into a little bit of why that is in the slides to come. The thing that I wanted to highlight is this little graphic on the right-hand side that I've pulled out of this study above. And that just shows that the rumen that contains all of this, all of these microorganisms, has the capacity that if those microorganisms start to malfunction, or we get something called dysbiosis, which that term might not be new to you, but if it is, it's basically just a dysfunction in the rumen and the rumen fluid and contents that can lead to disease processes. So a lot of those mast-builder diseases are quite common on the conventional farms, and I don't know if we quite understand exactly what role the microbiome is playing in that disease process. So the next slide that we've got here, and this again, I've thrown this in more for fun because I found this when I was doing research, that they do a global rumen census. So this is a bit of a tangent, so just forgive me for the tangent. So every, well, I think this is a one-off project, but I believe that they're trying to repeat it. They've taken rumen fluid samples from species including cattle and sheep, but also goats, buffalo, and even giraffes all over the world. They've analysed their rumen fluid, and they found that even though these species are geographically spread across the world, because they have a rumen, they actually have a very similar core microbiome population of bacteria. I just think that's a really interesting and cool fact. So thinking about the diversity that exists within the rumen, this is a system that's been, has evolved over many years. And it's reached a point where it's sort of at that perfect point that it can survive with the bacteria that's in it, and it can metabolize the energy well, and it does this across different species. I just thought that was quite interesting. So going back to getting off the tangent, why do we need to feed the rumen for the wider health of the animal? So a functioning microbiome within the rumen ensures that all of the dietary nutrients that's being taken in is metabolized into essential nutrients that is readily available in the body. Similar to us, if you eat rubbish, you feel rubbish. It's just the same as we know for ruminants. If you have a poor diet and a lack of those essential nutrients, then you are very likely to start having an underperforming immune system and an increased risk of developing disease. So there's a couple of studies at the bottom there on the right that you might be interested in going to have a look at that dig into this a little bit further. I can send you the links later on. That essentially a healthy microbiome, similar to us, is about managing an efficient or a good pH level within the rumen. And part of that is to prevent the growth of pathogens, which are like disease-causing organisms. And those can then go on to cause a disease process at a later time. So pH is really important. The microbiome is in control of that. The other thing is we spoke a little bit at the beginning about creating these volatile fatty acids. So those are also really involved in quite a complicated immune regulation process, which, to be honest, I probably couldn't recite off the top of my head right now, but I can certainly send you some information or a book that can tell you more about it. But it's a lot of things about T cells and B cells, which might be familiar to anyone who's done biology. Or there might be somebody on the call who has expert knowledge in that. So involved in this immune regulation and also intestinal barrier strength. So the microbiome health at the sort of top of the GI tract, essentially, in that forestomach compartment, coming down into the entire gut. The microbiome at the top will affect the entire gut right the way down, which again makes sense when you think about, if we eat fermented foods, it benefits our entire GI tract. It's just the same. So the other thing that I thought was quite interesting is the phenomenon that they call the microbiome gut organ axis. So preventing dysbiosis, and again, dysbiosis is malfunctioning, preventing that malfunctioning of the GI tract aids the immune system in preventing dysfunction in other organs. So previously, they've sort of thought about the rumen microbiome as being on its own and essentially just being an option that we can manipulate to prevent methane emissions. But really what we're learning, and certainly I think this is being driven by what we're learning in human health as well, is the microbiome influences other organs' health. So we're talking liver, spleen, brain, all of these things are connected. We can't ask a cow or a sheep if they feel brighter and happier when they're eating a multi-species sward and when they've got a supported microbiome. But I think we could probably hypothesize that we are supporting their brain health as much as we can do. So again, throwing this in, diversity of any kind builds resilience. Now, I think it's quite interesting that we could be talking about the farm business, or we could be talking about ruminant gut health. So diversity in the form of providing a diverse diet enables the gut to create a very resilient, abundant population of microorganisms that can support their wider health. Now, are there any other benefits? So the main other benefit that exists is obviously for welfare. Now, anyone engaging in regenerative practices on farm, and certainly as I would hear anecdotally from my clients and friends, is that offering a regenerative style of grazing or style of farming often increases the welfare of the cattle on farm. And I think there's many reasons for that. I mean, one of them would be the ability for us to be offering them the chance to have self-selection. Again, I'm going to probably lean a bit more towards cattle when I'm talking now, because that's where a lot of the information has been based. We don't know quite as much about sheep and their behaviour, but hopefully that'll change over time. So going back to the self-selection, it offers them the chance to explore in an inquisitive way, expressing their natural behaviour. It's really good enrichment. It's providing them the opportunity to explore new environments and try new feed and foods. We've certainly found that the clients that have engaged with planting Herbal Leys or tree fodder, that they can be quite nervous of trying the new foods, but it's shown, and there's quite an interesting bit of reading that I've put on the screen there that you can follow up with, that if they go and try something new, that they'll try it in a small quantity and then they'll wait an amount of time, and then they just want, well, allegedly, or we believe that they want to make sure that they're not becoming unwell. And if they don't become unwell, they'll go back and they'll believe that it's safe and they'll carry on eating it. So I just think it's quite exciting to be able to offer cattle and sheep an environment where we can give them a much more enriched grazing lifestyle and something that's more in line with what they've evolved to be part of. So the other thing, this is more of a plug for my local area. So I'm from Northumberland originally, and currently working here as a vet. But there's a herd of cattle that you might have heard of, and that's a domestic cattle, but they've had very, very little human involvement for decades now, and they are the most phenomenally interesting herd to go and observe, because they are almost completely living out their sort of natural behaviour. So they are grazing pasture, they graze tree fodder, they go for shrubs, and they use their scent glands, they have dust baths, they establish hierarchy. And if you just watch them, it's very, very interesting. So it's quite cheap to go. I think it's like under £10 or something to get a ticket to go in. And the folks that work there have phenomenal knowledge. So I'd really recommend it if you're interested in going to watch cattle behave in their sort of natural environment. I suppose it's not quite as natural with it being Northumberland, but it's quite interesting. As a side note, for anyone who's into regenerative, and their dung beetles, the other interesting thing about Chillingham is they haven't had any chemical insecticides in all of that time. So the dung beetles on that pasture are phenomenal. And the very interesting thing is that their dung pats disappear within a week. So you would imagine with the size of pasture they're on that there would be a lot of dung lying around, but actually it disappears almost just a few days after it's been passed. So that's enough of a tangent on my local favourite cattle herd. The other thing I thought I would mention when we think about self-selection, depending on what books you might have read, not to mention names, you might have come across mineral cafeterias. And we've had a lot of people quite interested in trying to get those off the ground in the UK. But unfortunately, the mineral cafeterias, which are a free access bar where they provide a number of different minerals in like a powder form or a lick form, but individually. So it's sort of like a lick bucket, but you're spreading out every option that they could have separately, and you can observe what they take more of and what they might be deficient in. Unfortunately, in the UK, the products that they have in the US aren't legal here, so we can't do exactly the same project, but we have sort of discussed possibly putting some different supplements out. So it might be a conversation that's better directed towards your local vet. But there are a couple of options if you want to go down the route of providing this cafeteria system. And if you don't know about it, I'd recommend having a little Google and a read about the US systems, because they are pretty cool. They have them on sliding decks and they can pull them around the field, and the cows just help themselves. And it's quite an interesting project. So those are all the welfare impacts for that self-selection. So this is the vetty part of the talk, I'm afraid. I obviously am very pro multi-species swords, and I think they're brilliant. And Lynnie is going to go into the details as to why that is. However, we have seen a couple of problems where we've jumped onto a different grazing system or made quite fairly quick and drastic changes on farm. So number one, I would say, I would always, if you're going to make a big change that might impact animal health, obviously, I'm going to recommend that you engage with your vet. Just in case there might be anything specific to you. I would certainly consider, if you have had any problems with lameness and things like abortion, I would just consult with the vet when you're changing onto a system, if you are going to engage in that change. The possible risks that I would say kind of transcend farm and would be quite common amongst different farms, although I would hope everyone on this call hasn't had experience with this. Number one would be Clostridial disease. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Clostridial disease, but essentially a multi-species sward and even possibly tree fodder, if they are left to go and run wild and they eat, we're probably talking about growing lambs, going to be the most greedy. If they go onto that pasture hungry and they eat it at high speed and they choose only the sweetest shoots, they're going to potentially push themselves into ruminal acidosis, dysbiosis of their microbiome, which is going to result in a proliferation of more harmful bacteria, potentially overproduction of gas. And then you can get a disease that we colloquially call red gut disease, which is essentially they blow up with gas and their gut flips and it could be fatal. So there's not much published on how common that is, but I would say from an anecdotal point of view, I've certainly seen several cases, but they tend to be sporadic, but it's certainly worth considering whether you need to have some kind of plan in place to protect certainly growing lambs against those disease processes. And then the next thing, now I know that Lynnie's going to cover the magic of Herbal Leys and the impact on worm burdens, but I would just say on a separate note that we have had occasions where the worm burdens on Herbal Leys that aren't managed properly can get slightly out of control. And it's sometimes because we have not, complacency is maybe the wrong word, but there's so many positive benefits. We can maybe get into the trouble where we have a bad year and we have a rising worm burden and it's happened and we haven't realised, and then we end up with bad issues later on. So my overarching point is not that worm burdens will likely be an issue, but I wouldn't be complacent on taking egg counts if possible. I'd recommend that you get trained up and get a microscope and do it on your own, because it's well within everyone's capabilities, and it's quite, I was about to say it's quite an interesting and fun thing to do, but that might be specifically just me. But it is quite an interesting thing to be able to do on farm. And certainly, you know, if you're looking at your soil health, I'm sure a lot of you have microscopes anyway, and probably a lot of you are already doing your own worm egg counts, but I would just ensure that you keep doing them. And then the last thing, which I've only added in because of last year being a mast year and us having a great deal of acorn poisoning locally in this area, and I know nationally it's been quite bad, but goes without saying, if you're going to engage in potentially grazing tree fodder, or you're going to graze hedgerows or areas on the farm that you haven't previously grazed, just it's common sense, just go and make sure that you don't have any poisonous species that are there. And certainly if you have oak trees, which I hope you do, because obviously they're a wonderful thing to have on the farm, just make sure that we limit access when we have a year when the pasture isn't in quite as good health. They'll only, well, theoretically, they should only go for acorns if they're lacking in other feed. They shouldn't really go for acorns if they've got fodder in front of them. But just bear that in mind if you're thinking about changing up how you're grazing on farm. And then the last thing, which kind of summarises that, is that a ruminant isn't very well suited to having a drastic diet shift. they need a period of transition. So any change in grazing strategy needs something of a transition for them to adjust. It's quite challenging to transition lambs onto Herbal Leys, and I think I'm probably not the best place to give you practical advice. I think there's probably a lot of farmers in this chat that will know better than me. But anything you can do to turn those lambs out not starving hungry onto the Herbal Ley will make a big difference. There's a couple of different things. Some people tell me it's better to turn them out in the morning or the evening, but I think finding what works for you and what's going to be the least shocking for their systems is best. So my last slide, and I'm aware that I'm nearly reaching 20 minutes, so I'll try and keep this brief. It's just again a bit of self-indulgence of something that I find quite interesting. So this is about nutrient density of beef, which I'm hoping will be an avenue for regenerative products to be marketed to increase profit, hopefully in the future. This isn't really news to us. We know this to be true, that it's likely that regenerative meat coming from a regenerative system where they're prioritising soil health will be much more nutrient dense than beef that's coming from a primarily grain-fed system or even just a grass-fed system. But I would direct you to go and have a look at the Bionutrient Institute. And they've got this fantastic website where they've analysed hundreds of samples of beef, and they've worked out all of their different nutrient compositions, and they've compared it against what kind of management system they've had. And it's just really interesting to rabbit hole to go down to have a look. But essentially the headlines are, in this study, which is mostly grass versus grain, there's a massive difference in omega-3 fatty acids, massive difference in components that are linked to reduced inflammation, much better fat profiles and much better mineral contents. So I'm hoping as more information comes out, certainly the study at the top there, that's looking a bit more into soil health directly relating to nutrient density. I'm hoping as time goes on, we're going to see more and more information like this coming out of the woodwork, and it'll give us a much bigger bed or bigger data set to be able to market meat that we know is being produced in a way that is going to be more nutrient dense, but in a way that we can take it to the market and really get some good profits for the amazing work that everyone's doing. So that's my final little bit of interesting information. That's me done. And if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out and I'll get in contact with you afterwards. And without further ado, I'd like to pass on to Lynnie. I'll take my screen off. I don't quite know how to take my screen off.
You've done it, Laura.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you. And for those that have popped in late, yeah, we just pop questions and thoughts in the chat as we go. We're just going to go seamlessly into Lynnie's presentation now. Lynnie's from a farmer from Sussex, and part of Whole Health Agriculture.
Brilliant. I just want to check. Can you see my screen okay?
Not yet, no.
Hold on. I don't know quite what's going on there. Let's just work back from that. Quite sure what's going on there. Let's just go again. Okay, is that sharing all right?
It still is not. No, it works in the trial run before we started, but
it did, didn't it? It worked perfectly well then.
Oh, right, here we go.
Are we there? Are we going now? Okay. Does that look better? Are we seeing now?
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, that works well. Okay, sorry about that. It did work perfectly first time round in the trial run, so not sure why it's playing up now, but there we go. We've got it going fine. So hi everybody, I'm Lynnie. I'm from Brickpits Organic Farm down in Sussex, so quite a long distance from all of you. So I hope that what I'm going to say about Herbal Leys and our soils is kind of, you can transfer that to where you are and your soils, but I'll try and keep it broad. We're going to do a bit of a gallop through because this is a massive subject, and I'm kind of trying to link lots of things together. But just to tell you a little bit about us, we're a small mixed organic farm. We've been here for 25 years. Our end game is organic lamb and beef boxes. That's what we produce. We have about 20 Hereford cattle and about 170 ewes. We have some permanent pasture. We have some arable land that moves through rotation. So our arable is really there to provide barley for the ewes in the run up to lambing, and straw for the cattle in the winter when they eventually have to come in. We're in the high weald area of outstanding natural beauty, which is a lovely place to be, but it does mean that we have small fields. The tradition around here is like a kind of 10-acre field, just to give you sort of like a bit of a picture of how things are here. So, and traditionally surrounded by hedges. When we first came here, that had all been ripped out, and we've spent years putting it back. But that's the tradition around here. As they said, I also work for Whole Health Ag. I teach on their foundation course for farm homeopathy for livestock farmers, and they're a not-for-profit company that help farmers restore health to land and livestock for everybody. So without further ado, I'm just going to move on and tell you a little bit about the rotations on our farm, and then you can kind of, get your head around a bit of it. We have a complicated set of rotations. We have permanent grass fields, which are really high in species diversity. We've deliberately, made them so. And when I go through some of the species shortly, they are in both our arable grassland phases and in our permanent grassland. Those species we put in both of those. So on our permanent grassland, if we'd like to say that it might be hay 1 year followed by the cattle, so the cattle go in after the hay cut, or if we're not using that field for hay, it'll just be cattle, and then the following year it'll be sheep, and then it goes back round again, hay followed by cattle, and then sheep. So we alternate that. On the arable side, it's a whole lot more complicated. We have about 7 arable fields, and at any one time, 2 of them will be in crop. So our arable rotation runs barley, and then that will go into a stubble turnip forage rate mix. It's quite a varied mix, which will do our fat lambs through the winter, goes back into barley, and that barley in the second year is undersown with the Herbal Ley. And that will sit there for about 5-6 years, depending, and then go round. So when that arable field is in that grassland phase, for want of a better word, so when it's in its Herbal Ley, the rotation that runs on that for us is the first year it would be like sheep. The second year we would take a crop of silage because that's going to the cattle, and then the sheep would follow on behind that. The third year that would run through with cattle. The fourth year it would run through with sheep. And the fifth year we would take a crop of silage, and then it would run through with sheep. So it kind of, again, is alternating all the time. Just a little thought there is that sometimes in that, if you want to call it year 0, so when the barley crop has come off in the summer and we've got that Herbal Ley growing on, depending on the weather, you can find that, like, by September time, you've kind of got Herbal Ley up to your knees, and it's pretty thick, and you don't want it to roll through the winter like that. So sometimes in that first bit, we will lightly graze that with the cattle and just let them chomp that off, just to be sure that we can kind of get it to where we want. So that's a bit about our rotations. I know that's probably all quite complicated, but yeah, things move around, and in general, it pretty much works. So I wanted to say a bit about Herbal Leys. These are some of the brilliant points of Herbal Leys. In terms of establishment, if anyone's out there wondering about that, when we do ours, and it's entirely up to different people how they do theirs, we would plough. So remember that these fields are sitting in a grassland phase for sort of 5 or 6 years. So then they're getting ploughed up. We would drill the barley in, we would roll that with a flat roller, and then we have a tine weeder that would rattle through with a like a stock slug pelleter, or we'd never used it for slug pellets, we just used it for seeding. We used it as a seeder. Basically that sits on the tine weeder, so as the tine weeder rattles through, it fires the seed out, and that gets scratched in, and we would then roll that with a set of Cambridge rolls, just so that you don't get the capping that you would get with the flat roller again. And then obviously that would sit under the barley crop would grow, the Herbal Ley would come up, and round we go on our rotation. Probably get about 5 years out of that Herbal Ley, partly because we graze it quite hard in the winter with sheep, and especially in that last year when we know it's going to be ploughed up, it's almost like we can sacrifice that field a little bit more than we would our others. Soil structure's key, and most fields we'd be really careful on that one, because we know it's going to be ploughed. We might take a little bit more of a chance with that. So Herbal Leys, the good things about them, I mean, brilliant. They build soil fertility and soil structure. We're on clay and sands overlaying here. We've got some fields that are really quite clayey. Deep roots, absolutely brilliant. Great in a drought. Last summer we had a terrible drought, absolutely, you know, right through the summer, no rain at all. Managed to keep our herbal leys going all the way through, so really good. And remember, those deep roots are pulling up minerals and nutrients from deep down in the soil and lifting them up so that the livestock can kind of chomp away and really get that, which they wouldn't be able to get otherwise if you just got, you know, short rooting grass species. With the herbal leys, depending on what you've got in them, you're getting a longer growing season because different species are coming to the fore at different times. And there's a lot of species in there, and we'll talk about, I'll flip through some of those shortly, but a lot of them have got a lot of tannin in them, so that's giving you that parasite control. But I would absolutely back what Lahra said, is you cannot take your finger off the pulse. You still need to be doing your fecal egg counts. You still need to be walking out and collecting your poo and staring down the microscope. You can't just assume because you've put them on a herbal ley. I mean, I have seen it, you know, we've watched a fecal egg count coming and thinking, okay, that's on the rise. We've got a herbal ley we can pop them on. I've popped them on it and watched it drop back down again. But you need to be monitoring that. You need to be on it. And as Lahra said, changes in diet can be really stressful and disturbing to sheep. We would always use Nux vomica, the homeopathic remedy. In humans, we would call it the hangover cure. So it's like moving on to too much rich food. It's exactly the same in livestock. And we have margins, big 6 metre margins around all of our fields. So you've got a hedge, you've got a 6 metre margin, and then you've got your herbal ley. We've got a beetle bank up the middle. So we've got plenty in that field for them to fall back on, run back, if you like. Which is not the new diet. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that, especially if you're in the first year of a herbal ley and it's really powerful, really rocketing on. You know, with young growing lambs, you want to be a bit careful how you're putting them on there. Certainly we would give Nux Vom, certainly we'd be monitoring that, and we would, you know, we've got those big margins, we've got the beetle banks, we've got all those bits that've got like the permanent grassy bit within the arable field that's full of herbal ley. So, you know, we're not just piling them onto chocolate cake and, you know, letting them gorge on it. So yeah, so good high legume contents in a lot of herbal leys. You know, you're going to get higher proteins there, but that does come with the thing that you need to, you know, maybe think about that. We would always use Nux Bomb with any change of diet, either up a gear or down a gear, or moving from, you know, drier grass to better grass, or any of those changes. It's really key. And I think the overall thing to say is that, you know, it's the 5 a day principle, isn't it? It's the same for us. If we just ate chocolate cake, we wouldn't be very well. If we eat, you know, it should be 10 a day really, but if we eat fruit and vegetables, we've got a better vitality. We're better able to kick off any illnesses, coughs or colds that come along, and we feel better. And that's no different for your livestock. It's not a new thing. Herbal leys aren't a new thing. I just put this on the bottom here just to indulge history a bit. You know, Newnham Turner back in the 40s, 50s was kind of saying, you know, your herbal ley, it's your fertilizer, it's your food, and it's your vet. You know, it's tackling all of those things for you. So I think that's you know, some of the key things. Obviously you can tell I'm really into them. They work for us, but you have to work out whether they're going to work for you. Just a couple of examples there. This is for heavy land, heavy clay, so you can see some of the species there. I'm going to pick out some of the herbs and go through those in a minute. But just to say that, you know, whilst we plough, because that becomes part of our rotation with the barley and it's undersown, you could overseed if you wanted to take a field, particularly you know, a worn out, knackered arable field, and overseed that, you know, put that down to some grasses, or if you've got a grassland pasture that's getting very tired, you could overseed that with a lot of the herbs, and you know, and really help yourself there. Equally, you know, there are people doing medicine paddocks, medicine strips, which I'll talk about a little bit further on, but just to give you an idea, we're just going to sort of romp through a few of the species to pull out a few things there. So if we look at yarrow, this is one of my absolute lovely favorites. You know, really deep rooting, high in vitamin A, is fantastic, you know, high in selenium, so you're getting your support for your muscle growth and your fertility of your flock or your herd. And interestingly, you know, we talked about kind of overindulgence and that bloat, as we would call it down here in the south. You know, if you put sheep on a field of clover, you know, you would struggle with bloat. But there's been some research that says, you know, even 20% of yarrow in that diet can decrease the risk of bloat. So it's good to mix into a clover sward, particularly if you've got a lot of clover in there. Think to put yarrow in alongside it. You know, if you're thinking of adding clover, think of adding yarrow as well. you do need to graze it. If you don't graze it, it can become a bit invasive, but you know, you can wick it out or top it or graze it if you need to. So again, you know, deep rooting, lifting things out of the soil. So yeah, the really good one, that. Sainfoin, I mean, it used to be called healthy hay, you know, that's the French translation. Fantastic, you know, drought resistance. We had a terrible drought last year. Sainfoin did really well. If you're going to make it into hay, you want to cut it when it's about maybe 50% flowering, and you don't want to turn it too much because you'll shatter the leaves. It's quite delicate in that sense. It's got a lot of tannins in it, and just to go over that tannin bit, you know, they bond to the proteins in the rumen, and they allow that to then pass through into the abomasum where it can be digested. So, you know, high tannin plants are generally very useful for livestock. And you know, something can be slow to get going in the first year. Once you've got it, you know, it's there, and it ramps on. I mean, historically, it would have been used probably for hay, largely. I mean, people used to grow it just as a hay crop, and then they would, once the hay was taken off, the regrowth would be used for fattening lambs. So, you know, you can see that it's got that real you know, boost with it. Again, it's quite good for bloat prevention, you know, and it's tannin rich, so it's also got that anthelmintic thing in that it's a good antiparasitic. Tannins at the parasites just don't like the tannins in the gut. It's not something they like. So another one, plantain. This is another great one to pop into your Herbal Leys. You know, really high in vitamins and minerals. You know, and you'll see the sheep seek that out at times and nibble away on it. It's really high in copper in particular, and in selenium. You know, great for coats and great for the wool of sheep. You know, if you think about a lack of copper, I know we worry about copper with sheep sometimes, but you know, if you think of a lack of copper, then you're heading into sort of the anemia territory, the poor growth, the bone weaknesses. Your fertility is probably going down. Think about swayback lambs. If you've got those sorts of problems, then it might be worth adding plantain. Obviously, speak to your vet, chat things through, do a bit of research. But plantain would be a good thing to add into your pastures if you're in that sort of territory. And it's really high in selenium. So, you know, again, if you're struggling with the kind of white muscle diseases, you've got stiff, weak lambs, you know, poor growth rates. Good for, you know, retained placenta in cattle is also linked to low selenium, as is stillbirths. Infertility. So those sorts of things. If you're seeing those things as an issue on your land, then adding in some of these species can be a way of kind of helping you sort of tackle those. Yeah, and but again, you know, yeah, chat it through with your vet, see, you know, get a bit of a plan going together, do a bit of research, see which ones will work for you. This is a lovely one, bird's foot trefoil. I love this. Used to be called eggs and bacon round here. I think it's to do with the colour of the flowers. Looks brilliant in the you know, fields where you see it. It can do really well on poor soils as well. We've got some outgrazing where it's really quite gritty, quite sandy. You know, we're in that kind of clash between the sandstones and the clays, fighting it out. But we do have it on the clay soils as well. Yeah, really an amazing fact. Lara digressed, so I'm gonna indulge myself here. Bird's foot trefoil supports 132 different species of insects, research shows. I mean, that's just phenomenal, isn't it, for a small little yellow plant in the ground? So, you know, we all know that the insects is good because that brings in the birds and the whole thing. So yeah, think about it in that way as well. But really good for coping on dry soils and in dry years. And I don't know how climate change is hitting you guys up there, but we're definitely seeing more drought, more dry times. The water table is dropping here. Definitely. Again, it's high in copper, so you know, you're going to get the benefits of better growth rates, better bones, better fertility, less anemia. So those are really good. Self-heal's a lovely little plant, beautiful to see in your forage when it's going. You know, great for liver health, really good. And as Lara sort of said, you know, what goes through the gut also affects other areas, the whole body. It's great for fevers, decreasing fevers, great for healing wounds. Humans use it a lot for sore throats. Great for stopping bleeding. So, you know, if these things are in your pasture, your livestock can access them, can take them in and can use them. If they're not in your pasture, they can't. And for very good reasons, we fence livestock away from things. But, you know, sometimes we need to add things back in so that they can select these things when they want them. Chicory's another one that's kind of a really good one for breaking up the grounds. As I said, we have quite heavy clay, and chicory has been really important here in helping that. Really gets the aeration of the soil going again, really yeah, can lift those minerals and those nutrients that are all locked down in the soil up. I mean, when we pull up roots, they are really long, really long. It's a great anthelmintic, you know, really good, great for lambs. Again, you know, as with all herbal leys, be careful how you introduce stock onto it. You know, use your RegenFarm, use your other things that you might use. Make sure you've got some run back land, or that you've got, you know, borders, margins that they can do. One thing I would say is, if you're not going to graze this for some reason, you know, if you've got, you know, you're moving stock around, it's always a juggle, isn't it? You have a plan and rotations and all this, and then, you know, things come along, you have to juggle things. You may find, if you're not grazing a field of chicory, you are topping it every 3 weeks, because it will romp through. If you've got chicory in your grassland, it can really push up. And the other thing I would say is, if you're making silage, which obviously we do off some of our arable rotation, if you let it go too far, the stalks can be quite woody. And if you're doing round bale silage, you don't want those stalks obviously poking through your silage wrap and ruining the quality of your silage. So just something to kind of bear in mind there. Maybe don't put it in every field, so that you've got some fields you can, you know, you can make hay and silage off that where you haven't got that issue. And it's just one to be, if you you know, keeping on top of it, grazing it and then letting it roll, and it's soft, that's fine. But if you let it roll on too hard, it will become quite a hard, stalky sort of tube, really. But yeah, brilliant plant, really, really good. And then burnet, that's a lovely one. Again, deep tap roots, great with dry soils. Yeah, the good thing with burnet is it gets away early in the spring, so you can get that flush of green and get things going, especially if it's been a bit cold and things have been holding back. Yeah, so that's quite a good one for that. It's anti-inflammatory, it's wound healing, it's astringent. You know, there's so many good points to burnet, and you can look all of these up online and see the benefits of them. What I'm really trying to demonstrate is that each of these things in your field, you know, can give something to your livestock, can give them, you know, good health. You know, that's really important. And just a tiny bit about trees, hedges and trees. You know, I mean, that's a whole talk in itself, isn't it? But if we just think about that, you know, so much more than shelter and shade. Obviously, we fence animals away from things, and woodland edges and things like that. And we've, you know, often we're fencing them out for good reasons. Sometimes we're letting them go into woodlands, wood pasture and things like that. But sometimes we're fencing them out. There's a lot in some of the new schemes about putting, if you're planting a new hedge, having your fencing quite a distance away from that hedge. So it used to be, I think it was 1 metre from the centre of the hedge, you had to have your fence in the old days of countryside stewardship and things. I think now it's like 2 metres, and some grant schemes are even 3 metres, which is great. But you want your livestock to be able to, you know, once you've got your hedge established, obviously not when you first planted it, but you want your livestock to be able to eat it and help themselves to it. Okay, just be careful what you put in that hedge. Generally, livestock are pretty aware and won't eat something that's poisonous, but you do need to be checking what you're planting. Obviously, all of these are fine. If we think of, you know, just an example there, willow, that's what originally, salicin is what aspirin is made of. You know, we would take aspirin when we felt ill. Livestock will often go to willow and eat it and chew the barky little stemmy bits when they're unwell. And I think that's a good thing to sort of think about, is if you've got an animal that's a bit off colour or not great, and you've brought it into the barn for some reason, you know, give it a bit of shelter, or because you're treating it for something, if you strip some leaves off the hedges, and a bit like you were saying with the mineral supplement in the States, Lara, if you strip those off and then just put them down in piles and watch what that animal's eating, you know, if it's something that's just off colour, it's not, you know, you've got a particular disease, but you know that animal's not quite right. If you watch what it's eating, it can often give you a really good key into what's wrong with that animal. You know, it's not like human where you can go, does it hurt here? Does it hurt there? You know, so quite often we're having to, you know, think quite hard to get what's wrong with an animal. And sometimes you can go, oh God, it's really taking the, you know, that, but it's not taking this, or it's really chewing on the willow, or it's not whatever. So yeah, just think about including bits of hedge and trees, as well as maybe gathering up some plants from the field. So, you know, bringing things into a barn is for good reason, but sometimes we still need to bring a bit of the outside in for them, I guess, is what I'm kind of saying, because there's so much there. So I want to pull all that together just by kind of, we use it within whole health agriculture, we use this traffic light model. For goodness sake, I don't know why I've got red blue-green there. PowerPoint's obviously playing up today. That should obviously be amber, and it should be written in yellow. Anyway, forgetting that, the green level is where we want to be. Everything running along happy, plenty of time going, things going well on the farm. So you've got time to be thinking strategically, moving on to the next thing, getting prepared. You know, that's where we'd all like to be, isn't it? But obviously things sometimes can slip into the red where you've got an animal that's ill with a problem that needs, you know, maybe needs the vet, or maybe you're giving it veterinary attention yourself. You know, that might be an acute, as in an accident or an emergency type thing, or an acute disease situation. Or it might be something that's been rumbling along for a while and is beginning to build. You know, maybe you've got a group of lambs that are struggling with cocci or clostridial or a bad worm problem or something like that. So what I'm really saying is that the herbal leys, or the herbs within your grassland pasture, your permanent pasture, can really help you stay in the green level. They can really help your livestock have a higher vitality, have good health, not just absence of disease. And if you've got them up there in the green level, you know, then if they get knocked back, you know, say there's a dog attack in the field or something happens, you know, they get separated, they're being weaned, you know, their best friend's gone off into another group because it's fatter than they are and it's going off to market. All of those things can cause immunity to drop. But if you've generally been running along at a pretty high level, you're going to bounce back up. You're going to get well better, you know, sooner, quicker, and you're going to not drop so low. Whereas, you know, if you've just been, you know, struggling along a bit anyway, and the pasture's not great and you're a bit low in vitality yourself, something comes along and gets you, you're going to take a much deeper dive, and it's going to take you much longer to get better. So, you know, that's the same for us humans as it is for our livestock. The more you can keep them going, so the more you can do in the green level, the better. And then there's loads you can do in the amber level. You can learn about homeopathy, you can learn about herbs. There's loads of stuff you can add in. There's obviously veterinary stuff that you might do yourself as a farmer or a shepherd or a herds person. Just a couple of examples off the top of my head. So if we were talking about the parasite thing, you know, looking back to our herbs, you might grab some yarrow, you might grab some nettles. Nettles are brilliant. We didn't even talk about nettles. They're full of adaptogens. And adaptogens, for those that don't know, decrease your physical and emotional stress. So if you're feeling a bit stressed out, go grab some nettles, have some nettle tea. But yeah, so you might mix up some yarrow, some nettles, some garlic, because that's a natural wormer, some honey, put that together in a tea, you know, in a tisane with hot water. And then if you've given something some chemical wormers, or if you've got something that's had terrible gut problems with wormers, you know, you might drench that into them. So that's a kind of bit in the amber level where you can learn to use herbs to kind of help. Obviously, you need to kind of learn that a bit. And there's lots of places that can help you with learning that. Just thinking on nettles for a moment there, you know, if you think of the Latin urtica, so we have an expression in the homeopathy world, so urtica 30 makes them squirty, urtica 6 dries sticks. You know, it's a way of controlling milk flow. If you need to dry something up, you'd be using urtica 6. If you need to make it more milky, you're going to be using urtica 30. It's really interesting because I run the local support group here for farmers in this area who are using homeopathy. And we've been talking about that one week, and the next month one came in. She went, "Oh God, you won't believe we were talking about urtica." And she said, "I watched the cows when they went out the milking parlour, and we'd just been drying them up, and they would not move into the field, and they were like going over this pile of rubble." And I was really, you know, thinking like, why aren't they moving on? And I walked round the corner, and the reason they're not moving on and gone back to the field on their own, because normally they take themselves, is because they'd stopped to eat a whole load of nettles. And she was like, "I just thought about you going, nettles, urtica, drying them up. Yep, we've just dried off the cows," and they're going, "What we need is nettles." And they'd walk around the corner of the barn, pile of rubble, growing nettles. That's what we want. And they were not budging from it. So she said, "I let them eat it and then moved them on," and they were happy to move on then. So, you know, if we can let things have what they need and access to what they need, you know, they will take it. Obviously, if we, you know, top them off, spray them off, you know, fence them out, then they can't get that. So just moving on from that, just to think a little bit, I mean, Lara touched on this, dis-ease, you know, is largely, you know, we know that stress increases cortisol levels, decreases immunity. So as farmers, unfortunately, as part of what we do, if you think about it from the animal's point of view, there is quite a lot of stress. I get weaned from my mum, I get put in a trailer and taken to some out grazing, I get moved into another group because I've grown in weight. You know, the bull comes or the ram comes, you know, there's a footpath with people walking down it with bright clothes on that I don't like, you know, whatever it may be, there is actually quite a lot of stress. And so the more we can do to give them those plants that will help them cope with the stress in their normal grazing, the better they'll be able to deal with it. And the more they can deal with the stress, the less dis-ease you get. Obviously, you might have exciting and maintaining causes, things like, an exciting cause would be, a dog running wild in amongst them or something like that, an accident or an emergency, that sort of thing. Maintaining causes, so if you had, like, I don't know, like a group of calves in a barn with pneumonia, yeah, you could use herbs and homeopathy to get them over that pneumonia. But if you don't sort the airflow out, it's going to come back again. So, you need to be aware of those things. But the more you can do at the basic level of getting the nutrition right, the more you can keep them well. And just as an example, to try and kind of round it up and pull it all in together, this is from a talk about parasites, but I just want to show you how much importance there is in the herbal ley bit. So if we look at the soil, because that's where our herbal ley is growing, that is number one. It starts from the soil. We've got all those beneficial organisms sitting in there, the dung beetles that Lara talked about, the fungi, the predatory nematodes, all of that is sitting in there. If you need to worm, and it happens even on the best farms where you get breakdowns and you have to do that, try and make it in a sacrificial area. Talk to your vet, work out whether you can hold them off in a barn and worm them in there and hold them in there for 48 hours, whatever, because putting those harsh chemicals straight out the back end back onto the ground unfortunately kills off the dung beetles, the predatory nematodes, the fungi, all the things that are helping you. So ironically, what you're using to clear up your worm problem is also decreasing your soil's ability to help you solve your worm problem. So I just throw that out there because that's something to really think about. Chat that through with your vet if you're not familiar with that whole thing. But rambling on, clean grazing is obviously important, knowing your life cycles of your parasites and all of that, thinking about pasture rotations and mixed grazing and all of that. But then when we get onto the next bit, look, here comes our herbal leys: chicory, plantain, saffron, saffron, bird's foot trefoil, all of those things we've been talking about, really important because they're tannin rich, and the parasites don't like tannin in the gut. So you're getting a lot of benefits from your herbal ley, but you're also getting that benefit of really, it's a balance. Any problem is a balance between the vitality of your animal, your sheep, your cow, and the vitality of the parasite. If you can keep the vitality of your animal as high as possible, and you can do down the chance for the parasite to get a hold, you're on a winner. Yeah. So by making the gut less hospitable to them, you're really helping yourself there. Wild garlic, absolutely brilliant. Where we've got that in fields and that coincides with spring grazing, they will just absolutely take it to the floor. They eat it up. Absolutely mad. Will seek it out and eat it up. So if you happen to have wild garlic, that's really good. And I mentioned before, you don't have to have a whole field with herbs in. You don't have to do a herbal ley, some huge, great big change. Lots of farmers here are starting to put, it depends on the, how many furrows on your plough or how big your cultivator is, but putting medicine strips down, just doing a strip in a field, just doing a little bit in that is, I don't know what's going on, is really, I'm just going to turn that off. Sorry, is really really useful. So you can at a lower cost put a lot of herbs in, and then once you've got them starting to grow in that, you can spread them, yarrow, chicory, all of those, bird's foot trefoil, easy as you walk through checking your stock each day to pick up some seed from one and chuck it out somewhere else. I've definitely transferred seeds between outgrazings by doing that, as I'm walking through checking the stock, just gathering a load into my pocket, and then as I walk to the next field, throwing it back out again. So there's gathering it all together, the more you can do with each of these things, the better, really. And again, nettles is there, that native adaptogen. Forget buying ginseng at the health food shop, just get your nettle tea. So that's the end. I've gone over time. That's what my alarm was telling me. So Whole Health Ag, there's just a whole load of information on there that's free. As a basic, you can join as a basic member, which is free, and you can gather lots of information on the things I've been talking about. And we've got some webinars on other things as well. There's one coming up on fly strike, for example, if you're interested in that. So I'm going to hand back and stop my screen sharing now, and hand back, and we'll see where we go with the questions.
Brilliant. Wow, whistle stop tour of many times. All fantastic stuff. Thank you so much to both of you. I've written so many things down, and hopefully there's lots more questions in the room as well. Just to say again to people that came in late, my camera's not working, so My name's Abby. I'm here on the screen, but you can't see me. So I guess I can kick off with some questions, and then other people can chip in as we go. So I kind of observation being key to kind of everything really on the farm, isn't it? So, just like what are my animals doing? What's in the pasture? What's growing? Yeah, observing. We observe everything all the time. One thing I observed is my cows eating soil, to sort of sort of nosing through molehills and licking the soil. And yeah, I guess I've often wondered, what does that mean in practice? Uh, are they missing something? Is there something particular that they're looking for? And I guess it's the same when they're sort of like, nipping the tops off yarrow, skipping gaily through the meadows, demolishing all my beautiful yarrow. I mean that, yeah, what is that telling me about the health of my livestock at that particular time? Is there something? Presumably, it's a message of some sort. What do I read into that? Either of you, really, I suppose.
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
You go first, Laura, you're there.
Well, you might know a little bit more about the chicory. I think it's quite common for them to bite off the top of plants because it often tastes the best. So that might be just being choosy on what tastes best. But there might be more to that Lynnie can elaborate on. From a soil point of view, I think that's tricky without knowing the composition of your soil, because that might depend on what the chemical composition of your soil is, if that makes sense. So it's kind of hard to answer that without knowing much about the farm background. Is that on normal? What kind of pasture is that on, Abby, that they're seeking out the soil?
I mean, it's reasonably diverse pasture. So it's permanent pasture. I don't do any sort of reseeding here or anything.
Yeah.
It's all hilly ground, really. Yeah. But I mean, this land was, so I've already owned it for like 2 years, and it was very conventionally managed. Set stock grades, sprayed the fertilizer every year for decades. Yeah, and I've kind of disrupted all of that by kind of adaptive multi-paddock grazing my cattle.
Perfect, yeah.
Not for a year, actually. No stock on it for a year, just like a whole year of rest before we brought the cattle on. Yeah, and everything just went crazy in that first year. It was amazing. But yeah, lots of yarrow, lots of plantain, lots of all that stuff is kind of very naturally. And I'm really worried about overgrazing it, grazing it out, and so many things I'm concerned about. But yeah.
Totally. The last thing I will say is I think I probably can't comment exactly what they're looking for, but I think it's obvious that they're looking for something, and that will hopefully come out over time as the sward matures and as you add in other species, and they can bring up some more nutrients out of the soil that they're seeking. I don't know if Lynnie's got any other pearls of wisdom for us.
Yeah, I think it's, sometimes you just got to think, well, if they're going for those, at least you've got those there and they're gaining those trace elements. Quite often it's just that, those deeper rooted plants are bringing up things that aren't in the grass. So if they've got, there's grass there and then they've got those plants and they're kind of going, yeah, that's what I need right now. So they're eating those off in preference to the grass, because that then they can take in those nutrients that are in those plants. So, sort of yarrow, you think vitamin A, those sorts of things, but there's a whole range of things, and as Laura says, sometimes it's not easy to nail it down to one thing. I think the key point is that if those things are there available to them, they can take them when they need them. I think that that ability to self-select is really useful.
I guess a related question to that, is there a part of the plant that is more useful? It's like the flowers, leaves, or is it just all aerial parts, or is it sometimes the roots? I mean, it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so it can be so it's certainly in human herb use, you might sometimes use the root in preference to the leaves or the stalk or the seeds or whatever. So it depends plant by plant, and you can look that up online or in books. But generally when animals are eating, they tend to eat, you might find that they eat it not so much when it's in seed, or that they particularly go for it when it's at a certain stage. But generally they will take, most of the plant because that's what they're grazing. They won't, I guess pigs, I don't know much about pigs, but I guess pigs would dig out roots of things and go for those. Yeah, I don't see that so much in others. If you're looking at something like nettles, if you leave the nettles to go to the point where the seeds go black, they're hanging down in those kind of black tendrils. If you take a bag out and just gather loads of those in, and that's good to store through to the winter, so that if you've got a sick animal during the winter, you can add some of that back into their feed, and that's a really good way of getting, the benefits of nettle into livestock in the winter. Particularly if you've got something that's come into a barn or something because it's not very well. So yeah, it's generally all parts of the plant they will eat. But you'll watch them, sometimes you watch them eating the sheep particularly getting the nettles, and they'll kind of lift their lips back and just pick at certain bits of the leaf, and sometimes they'll go for the tops, or sometimes they'll go for the older leaves. They're taking what they want, and I think the thing is just to give them the access to it so that they can.
There's an enormous amount of variability in what minerals are accessible in which part of the plant and at what time they're available, which it appears can vary with the wind. So the other thing is there's a lot that we don't know. So observing them is the key, like Lynnie's saying. But I think there's when you start reading into it, it's an expansive area that can get quite confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the weather can have a really big effect as well. So you can, if you've suddenly got a lot of heat, the volatile oils are all coming up more. It can really, yeah. So yeah, but they're not going to worry about that. They're just going to access what they can out of your fields. I think that's the thing, is having it there.
Great. So lots of questions coming in the chat now. And guys, feel free to sort of put your hand up and jump in. So I'm not reading your questions out necessarily, but Oliver has said, have you got experience with allowing a herbal ley to go to seed occasionally to extend plant diversity longer than 5 years? And if so, could you speak about it?
So we are tied in our higher level stewardship scheme into that particular rotation on our arable. So we don't often let it go longer than that. But we have seen, there are times when things have gone to seed. If you get a year, like last year in the drought, everything set seed, really early, didn't it? Because that's a plant's stress mechanism working. And so, you could, I'm sure that by letting that set seed and letting it drop onto the ground, you could, and then trampling it with cattle or sheep or something to get good seed soil contact, you could certainly increase the amount that you have in a field, if that's what you're kind of hinting at. And then that would go on. That's a bit like overseeding, isn't it, to rejuvenate a field. Certainly I think you could probably do that with the chicory. You just have to be careful, because you'd end up with quite a lot of stalks, and I think if you're then topping off, you need to be careful about sheep's feet, and the stalks get catching at the top of the feet, and maybe doing damage there. I've certainly seen that over the years, because it can become really quite woody, and then if you've obviously cut it with a topper, you've left a stump that they can't necessarily get round or see as they're going. So, but other than that, I think definitely you could let things go to seed, let it get trampled in, do a light grazing over it, and then let it go again. And you probably get longer. I think it's some of the herbal species that start to diminish as you get to sort of 4 or 5 years, and as you went on 6, 7 years, you'll end up with more of your grasses and clovers taking over. The other things tend to get grazed out because the sheep and cattle tend to like them and they eat them. So
yeah. I guess this is a related question from Maxine. What is generally the reason for farmers deciding to sow herbal leys instead of managing for species-rich permanent pastures? I kind of wrote a similar sort of question down myself, which would be, do you have any specific advice and experience for how to manage a pasture to increase plant diversity, apart from like good grazing?
Yeah.
I'm going around dropping seeds in different places, like, which is what I've been doing, especially in some of the areas that the cattle have kind of like poached it up a little bit. And I've got a few kilos of Herbal Ley mix and just seeing what happens if I go and trample it in myself. Yeah. Any advice on that?
Shall I say there? So really the bit for us, the Herbal Leys is because it fits into part of an arable rotation. So because we're trying to keep everything on farm, so we're using the barley and the straw and things, and so therefore it suits us to then put a herbal ley in, because we know that that's a short-term thing. If you were all in permanent pasture, certainly you could work out your rotation so that each field had a bit of a rest at the time at which some of those species are coming on, and then setting seed, dropping their seed and going round again. Or you might decide that if you graze them, you might then have to accept the fact that you might overseed every so often, every 8 or 9 years or something. You might want to look at each pasture and go, okay, that one's now looking really like it's lost a lot of its herbs and it's looking a bit tired. We'll overseed. So that might be a way of stitching into the pasture or overseeding, to keep it going in permanent pasture. I think it's also the weather can really make changes. I mean, this year we have deadlines when we're not allowed to graze some of our high floristic diversity permanent pasture, which is tied into our HLS scheme. But that was madness this year because of the drought. Everything had already set seed, done its thing, and was just sort of still sitting there. So the weather can make a real difference as well. But yeah, you need to manage your grazing times, I think, so that you were allowing some in each field, some of those things to set seed and carry on.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear, Laura, do you, as a vet, have you seen a noticeable difference with some of the farms that you work with? Obviously you have to be confidential, but between I guess those that are grazing on kind of a sort of less species rich swards compared to diverse and species rich swards, is
Yeah.
how much evidence there is around this kind of stuff, which there probably isn't enough of at the moment.
I think definitely. I think it's just so farm specific. It's hard to make like broad sweeping comments because often a lot of other variables are happening at the same time, and maybe there's sort of like wide scale management change happening at the same time as grazing change. But certainly we've seen clients that have embraced it that are really enjoying it and find it a really positive change. And obviously I feel very positively about it, and I don't think I would feel quite so positive if I'd not seen it working on farms. But certainly we've had an awful lot of transition, and also going to groundswell and things like that, and meeting farmers there who aren't clients and hearing their stories about how they've embraced it. We've certainly seen some positive health benefits, I would say. I obviously had to include the negative potential health consequences, but I wouldn't be a vet if I didn't lower the mood. But generally, I think it does offer a lot of beneficial health benefits. Otherwise, I wouldn't be speaking about it.
Oh, you scared me a little bit with the kind of like.
I know, don't be scared. Just remember, I'm a vet, so I've always got something in the mind about.
You both talked about the importance of the transitions from kind of one sort of feed to another, one diet to another. Yeah, I mean, do you have any sort of top tips? Obviously, Lynnie, you talked about using Nux vomica and other sort of homeopathic remedies, and a bit about kind of having other sort of more permanent pasture strips. Is there anything else that we can do to kind of ease that transition?
I think what Lynnie said about the longer fibre fallback. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, Abby.
No, go on, carry on.
I was just saying, I'll hand over to Lynnie because she's obviously doing it in practice, but this fallback onto longer fibre and avoiding the ability, certainly the real problem group is a hungry group of growing lambs, because they're just going to go in and blitz it. But having that fallback, so lowering the line, if you're strip grazing, lowering the line onto the strip that they've just come off so that they can have the long fibre behind them, and just trying to make sure that they don't go onto the pasture hungry. So, for instance, don't bring them in for doing something for lameness and have them standing in pens for 4 hours and then turn them straight out onto a pasture of Herbal Leys, for instance. Not speaking from experience, but that would possibly be a time where you might select for them eating high energy feed at feed. But yeah, I'll hand over to Lynnie, who's got actual practical experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's about that difference, isn't it? The massive, you don't want to make any massive jumps. So you might go, that, oh my God, that Herbal Leys are really, coming on full. And we've got them on some pasture that they've really kind of eaten down now. If you've got a halfway house, you can put them on for, a little bit of time first and then move them on. You're going to be in a better situation, certainly. And we are lucky. We do have, big margins around all our fields, 6 metre margins and that. So there's always some, a mix of the kind of areas that are permanent grass and the Herbal Leys. And I think that probably helps a bit as well. It kind of, it is managing that difference and working out, always being sort of one step ahead. I mean, we graze whole fields at a time. We don't do little bits in electric fencing or anything, but it is bearing in mind that you're moving to that field next. How is that field looking? What are they on? And it's balancing how hard you're going to push them on the field they're on to how much of a change that will make when they move on to the next field. I think it's that change. Yeah, of course you can do things with Nux Farm and stuff, but you don't want to be making those huge leaps if you can avoid it. Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, Patrick's asked a very interesting question, which obviously, I'm in southwest Scotland. It's very wet here, and I have wondered about this myself. Any particular seed species mixes for in Herbal Leys that are more robust for cattle's feet in wet weather, especially if you're out wintering, I think. Yeah. Any particular species that are built?
Silence.
No.
Yeah, I'll you can share my slide deck afterwards, and the left hand one of that slide that I showed has got the Herbal Heavy Land mix on it. So that is a bit more attuned to taking a harder thing. I mean, admittedly, we do pull our cattle in the winter when it gets too wet. The clay that we are on, we get to the point where they're kind of eating one mouthful and ruining four. So just to preserve our ground, we do pull them in, so we're not going right through the winter as Patrick may be there. But I think, if you look at those species, and if you look at the Cotswold Seeds website, there's lots of really really good information there on dealing with heavy land, dealing with heavy clays, keeping good sward or good density at the bottom through the winter. So I think and they're very good on the phone, so if you want to ring and have a good conversation with them. But it is a challenge, definitely. You're if you've got it takes a few years, doesn't it, for it all to knit together, to map together, to start to really be working well. And of course, in a Herbal Ley, you've got that beginning bit, and then you're rolling on. You've only got a short time. It's not like a permanent pasture that's been there for 20 years or whatever. You've got that short bit to get it good and going on. I guess running what we do sometimes, where we have the barley comes off in the summer, it'll ramp up, and then we might lightly graze something over it just to get it back down again before it goes into that first winter, so that it comes out in the spring a bit more tillered out, a bit more branching out, and so you're getting more of a base in there sooner. That is a useful technique. But I think looking at species, particularly trying to pick the ones that work for your soils and your situation is key.
Other seed companies are available.
Yes,
but Cotswolds are particularly good, and that's where I get mine.
The information, you can buy your seeds where you like, but the information that they have is quite useful. Yeah.
Agree. Somebody identifying only as user says, do you intentionally manage for tall sward grazing? Is it beneficial to have some more dignified and seed heads in the mix? I think we've kind of touched on that a little, didn't we? But with different parts of the plant being nutritious in different ways. But any thoughts on that?
I'll let you take it, Lynnie.
Do you want to say anything
That's far more your domain.
about those bits in the digestion? Because you know, as a vet, you've got more of a key into that. So yeah, I mean, there is you know, they will eat all sorts of bit, you know, but I think more the key thing is if you're wanting to make it into hay, is getting it at a good stage. Particularly for some of the, you know, some of the plants. If you're looking at saffron, you don't want to have it completely flowering and gone over. If you want the good hay in the winter to be using, you want it to have got it at its kind of like, you know, peak, not peak in terms of it's all flowering and gone over. You want it as it's growing towards that, and probably at like the kind of 50% flowering stage. So yeah, I think there's, if you're preserving forage for winter feed, you want to be cutting it at a good stage. In terms of grazing it, yeah, I think you can, yeah, there is some benefit in pushing them in. You don't want them to trample it all down, but certainly they will, you know, we've had years where the growth has been so good on all the fields, we're struggling to keep up. You know, last year was a drought and we were struggling to keep grass ahead of them. Some years you're thinking, oh God, we've got to get around that field, or we're going to have to top it, or are we going to cut that one for silage as extra, but we don't really need it. Does someone else need it? You know, there's always that bit of a juggle going on, isn't there? But yeah, we have put things into taller fields, and they haven't, you know, eaten it down. So even when chicory's gone, you know, a bit too far, we helped out a neighbouring organic dairy farm where they'd got a field that was just solely chicory, that had really gone quite mad, and we did manage to sort of graze that down from what was really quite tall for the sheep. But yeah, that normally you wouldn't be in that situation.
I think I just noticed it's nearly 8:25, so we should probably think about wrapping up now. I can't see any more questions in the chat. Has anybody got any final burning questions or comments or feedback? Anything? Now is your chance. I think we'll wrap up. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's been a really interesting discussion. Like I said, so, I know I did have one more thing actually. Obviously it's, you know, we're going into calving and lambing season at the moment. And I guess this is potentially a question for Lahra, both of you really, but yeah, and I think one of your earlier slides maybe had the various different minerals that are kind of needed the most at different times. I remember this is something I'm not familiar with myself yet, but yeah, what particular minerals and what plants can help with that, with kind of our sort of the final stages of calving and lambing. Well, as we get closer to calving and lambing.
Every mineral, but specifically, so there's some quite good books on this that I could send you some titles on, but right the way through pregnancy, the demands for different minerals and vitamins will change, but in particular at the cusp of them being about to give birth, magnesium becomes the front runner. Selenium's still quite important, and iodine is normally mid to end pregnancy, and vitamin A is very important for colostrum production. But I suppose linking into what Lynnie said and a little bit of what I said, calving is one of the times where they're undergoing a mass physiological stress on their body. So every mineral and nutrients is required. So in terms of providing plants around that time, I think any plant that's got good contents, but really it's more about volume and abundance of all species, I would say. But I'll let Lynnie talk on that. But from a mineral provision point of view, I think that's the only thing to be wary of. If you're a spring calving herd and they're currently on pasture and the pasture isn't very good, that you have the potential that the wheels might fall off. So either try and observe what they're eating. I mean, obviously as a vet, I'm going to recommend blood testing to make sure that they've got the minerals they need. But at the first sign that there might be lacking mineral status, so for calving, that would be if they're calving slowly, that would be a big sign that they're lacking in minerals. Or if you're getting retained fetal membranes that Lynnie mentioned, that would be when I would start to worry that the minerals weren't quite right. But I'll let Lynnie talk more about specific plants, but that's my 2 cents on it. Doesn't really help, does it?
I mean, especially this time of year when actually, you know, the pasture is still not really growing that much, and you know, the yarrow is starting to come through, and things are starting to come through, but it's not that boosting yet, is it? So
I think the important thing is that you're establishing at the moment, so there's no crime in providing them with supplementary minerals if they need it. You know, it's much more important that they're healthy, and over time you'll get to the point where hopefully you can withdraw that. But at the moment, if they need it, there's no shame in providing it. But hopefully you can work out other ways to avoid it in future. But yeah, I'll let Lynnie speak. Sorry.
No, I think it's dead right there. And sometimes, you know, the weather we've had, particularly wet winter here, as I guess you probably have as well. So what's going to grow on at what stage? You know, the last few days the temperature has risen again, and the ground temperature is starting to rise. So things are starting to grow on, and it's also about when you calve or when you lamb. So the later lambing flocks, the sort of April down here, April, May kind of flocks, those you know, by then the grass is starting to go, and those early things like plantain and that will start to come through, so they're able to get those. But I think the thing is, if you can make hay in the summer off multi-species sward, whether that's herbal ley or permanent pasture, that has got those key things in it, and then you can be saving, you know, if you've only got a few fields that have got that in, or a bit where you go, well, that field has got a high diversity of species, try and mark that hay and save that hay, you know, stack it in a different bit of the barn or whatever it may be, so that in that last bit of the run up to lambing, calving, whatever it may be, you pile that hay in or that silage in, so that you know that as much as you can, they're getting those extra things at that point. I think that's one way round it. But yeah, it's really difficult, and for early lambing flocks, you know, really hard, because it's just not there in the, you know, things haven't grown yet, they're not there. So yeah, and again, it's, you know, observation of your livestock, just to make sure that they're not going down, you know, downhill with something because they're lacking in those minerals. But over time, you know, that will build. I think the thing is, you know, I can remember, like 25 years ago when we were converting to organic, we bought a farm and then converted it, and you know, in those early days, it had all been arable, it had been wheat, and pretty well abused, the land. And so those first few years, you know, the things weren't in the pasture, even though we were trying to sow them and get them going and all of that. And I think when you're at that first beginning stage, that's quite hard to, so, you know, if you can maybe buy in some hay from somewhere that's got, you know, high floristic diversity, and just use that in that last bit of the trimester, you know, that would be another way to do it. You know, and there is that whole thing about rolling out hay, letting the seed drop, and that improving your pasture. So depending on what regulations you're tied in with, you know, whether you're organic or whatever, you know, if you can do that sort of thing, that might help you too.
yeah, lots of top tips, brilliant. Okay, and now it is 8:30, so we do need to finish. But again, massive thank you. You can't see me clapping, so I'll do the emoji thing. There we go. Thank you very much. It's been brilliant. This webinar has been recorded. I will be sending out the link afterwards, and along with your slides, you guys, if that's okay. Yeah, to share the slides afterwards.
Yeah.
What else? There are a couple more webinars coming up that you might want to know about. So on Monday, I'm presenting. I'm presenting on Monday, and my camera will be fixed by then. Oh, that's right. There we go. A webinar on food hubs, cooperative selling, and local supply chains, because I run a farmer-led food hub up here. And then later in March, on March 26th, one of our other cluster groups, the Cowell Peninsula Cluster Group, is organising a webinar on, that didn't work, that's the same one. Anyway, organising a webinar on water resilience. So that'll also be really interesting, so look out for that. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. Thank you all for coming, all you people there, and all of your questions. This has been really interesting, and I've loved every minute of it. Thank you. And have a nice evening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.